Welcome to the program. This is History on Drugs, and today we're going to talk about the Opium Wars. You know, when you learn about the Opium Wars, it makes you think that in all of our history books as kids growing up in the West, we're never the bad guys. We were always the good guys. There's no stories where we're the bad guys. So this is a story where we are the bad guys. And even though Great Britain is the leader of the execution of this atrocity, anybody complicit in it, and that participated in it is a bad guy. So the first Opium War, and this is going to be part one of a two-part episode because there's a lot of details. The first Opium War took place from 1839 to 1842. And just to summarize it, essentially Great Britain pushed a shitload of opium on the poor Chinese people to make up for a trade deficit because China didn't want to buy anybody's products. So there was a trade imbalance. So to set the stage, we got to really understand China at the time. They were a huge superpower at the time, 350 million people. And we're talking about the mid 1500s, right? And this was a time where globalization started to occur because if you watched some of our other episodes, we talk about the evolution and technology and development of sea travel and the ships and how big and fast they got. So instead of traveling, across the Mediterranean, countries could now go around the world and trade goods and look for more goods to trade. China was a country that thought they had everything they needed. They truly believed at the time, and maybe still to this day, that they are the center of the universe. But the one thing they really needed to push themselves forward to be this giant superpower was a better currency system. So the way they were collecting taxes in the 1500s is farmers in a remote part of China would literally load their rice on a carriage or their meat or their crops or their cattle, and they would bring it to a city, and that the equivalent of whatever that was valued at was their taxes. And that wasn't very practical. So they also were using copper, and the copper coinage was so heavy. And to pay taxes in copper, it would be heavier than probably putting a cow onto a carriage. So they wanted silver because at the time, silver was the currency of the globe. Everyone would take silver. Now, if you ever watch Pirates of the Caribbean, they talk about the pieces of 8, right? And it's a Spanish pieces of 8. It's a silver coin. And that silver, whether it was a coin or melted down, that currency was good in every corner of the world. The problem at the time was China didn't really have silver, but they had a lot of shit that people wanted to buy. They were selling so much porcelain and silk. We've talked in the past about the Silk Road, which was a trade route from China to the Mediterranean that started so they could just move tons of silk out to drive revenue and build up the country that they were. So to obtain silver, they needed a partner that had a lot of silver so they could sell them goods. And during this time, the Spanish conquistadors were traveling around the world in South America at this time, and they're basically taking all the resources, killing people, enslaving people. If you watched our episode on the history of cocaine, they enslaved the Andean people or the Incas, and they made them basically give us all your resources and do the work for it, and we're going to just get you high on the coca plant so you can work all day and not have to eat. So it's ironic that the coca is the foundation which will kick the Opium Wars into overdrive. So as the conquistadors are going through South America, they discover a mountain in Peru that is filled with so much silver. It's a cache of silver that's never been found on Earth before. They say, I read this somewhere, that there was enough silver in this one mountain that you can make a bridge all the way to Europe and back out of the silver that they found. So the Spanish conquistadors, they're pulling out the silver, they're bringing it up to Acapulco, Mexico, and then what they did on their ships is they brought it to Manila in the Philippines. That was the trading port, the biggest hub in the Far East. And the reason the Spanish could move so much and have such fast, giant ships is because they were building these ships out of the tropical wood they were getting from the Philippines. So whenever they went to war, these ships could withstand more fodder, more cannonball fire. Just the wood was durable and it was smooth, and it just helped build a more robust seafaring vessel. So they would load up in Acapulco, tons of silver, bring it to Manila. And in Manila, the Chinese delegation would go, hey, what you want to buy? You want to buy a watch? Hey, a couple of these things. No, but they would sell everything they had. Tea, porcelain, agricultural products, silk. They were making things in China. Like you think made in China today, it was the same back then. They had great skills and their craftsmanship was impeccable. They would make all kinds of knickknacks and gadgets, just like you see today. And countries were just buying them. The Chinese people weren't even using this stuff. So once they saw the Spanish had all this silver, they started really building a trade pact with the Spanish. And all of a sudden, after a few decades, China was gobbling up all the world's silver because people just kept buying and buying and buying. The problem is, nobody had anything that China wanted to buy for them. They felt like they had all their resources. They just wanted the silver. So the Spanish, Great Britain, America, Japan, France, all these other countries were like, wow, China's got all this silver. We need them to buy some of our stuff, but they won't. What can we get them to buy? And there was nothing. But the East India Company, which was a huge shipping company from Great Britain that was really an extension of the English crown, was moving illegal sales of opium up and down the coast of China. Now, at this time, opium was outlawed in China because they had gone through a little bit of an issue in their history, so they knew how bad it was, and they didn't want it to be part of their society. So the East India Company was doing this, but they were getting a lot of flack. So these smaller merchants got involved. A couple from America, like Russell and Company, and a few others, but a group called Jardine and Matheson, which is a huge trading conglomerate, even to this day, they took over the hustle. And because Great Britain had colonized so many other parts of the world, particularly in India, where they were producing so much opium, Jardine and Matheson started moving this opium and becoming like the Pablo Escobar of opium in the 1500s. They were moving so much illegal opium up and down the coastline. And it was kind of like if you watched our episode on Prohibition, right? These little boats would come off the shore of America. They'd go out to a big ship. They'd buy what they needed, and they'd come back in the dark of night. And that's what was happening with the opium. They'd come out of the rivers, they'd go out in the sea, they'd meet one of these big boats, and they would load it up with opium. So the technology of opium production from Great Britain really got pretty smart, right? They were making like cannonball-size tarred opium because the Chinese people like to smoke it. So they'd put it in chests. The emperor, during the Ming Dynasty, got wind of this. So now China's got all this money, but now their silver is coming out of the country to buy illegal goods. Why would Great Britain sell our people stuff that's illegal and it's going to ruin our society? So the emperor was like, let's put an end to this. So he puts a guy on the job. His name is Lin Zhu. And at first, Lin Zhu just writes a letter to Queen Victoria saying, hey, man, cut the shit. Like, this stuff is bad. You wouldn't want your people on this. Why are you pushing it on us? It's illegal here. Please don't do this. So Great Britain sends a delegation to go talk to the emperor. They go in, they travel inland, they sit down. They're like, listen, dude, okay, well, what will you buy from us? Well, if it's not opium, I mean, like, you're like the biggest country in the world. You have all the money. You're super uber wealthy. Like, there's a huge trade deficit here. Like, we're buying your goods. How about a little something for the big guy? And the emperor was like, we don't want anything, but have you tried the tea? And that was it. And that was the moment. Great Britain tried the tea. And all of a sudden, oh, it's tea time in Great Britain, right? The English people became the ultimate consumer of tea. So it was no longer just porcelain and silk going out of China as the top commodities. It was tea, and a shitload of tea, a ridiculous amount of tea. And the English consumption and the European consumption of tea just was outrageous. So now, like, the English people are like, come on, man. We come in to sell you something, you sell us more shit. Like, buy something from us, and they wouldn't. So they started pushing that opium illegal sales trade more and more onto the Chinese people. And then finally, there was one port in China where they allowed foreigners to come in, and they had some pretty strict rules about any type of interaction or trading. They opened up a port called Canton, and in this area, they had a section for foreign traders and merchants, and they called it the factory. And that was the area they had to stay. They weren't allowed to bring their wives. They weren't allowed to learn the Chinese language. They didn't want them interacting or going inland because they wanted to keep their culture intact. So one night, a bar fight ensues with some English people from the factory, and a gunfight breaks out, and a Chinese civilian gets killed. The emperor's pissed. Lin Su is pissed. He's like, give us that guy. We're going to do our Chinese justice on him. And Great Britain's like, no. We will take care of our own people. Even though it happened there, we'll use our own democratic process to take care of whatever crime they committed. And it started kind of like this standoff battle, but this really wasn't the event that tipped it over. It was the trade deficit. So Great Britain was looking for a reason to just put a bigger footprint in on China. So this event started pissing off each delegation. Then all of a sudden, Lin Zhu, the guy that was appointed to stop the illegal opium trade, set a blockade and cut off all supplies and resources going into the factory. Okay, he blockaded the river so no smuggling operations can come up. And then, no, he didn't. Oh, man. Then he took like somewhere between 20 and 40,000 chests of opium from the British merchants, and he destroyed it. Not good. That's not good. That's a shitload of money. Shitload of money. This created a problem. Back in Victorian England, they're like, okay, let's send in the big boys. So Great Britain starts sending warships off the coast of China. And China, they didn't care. They're like, what, you're going to mess with us? Nobody messes with China. We have 300 or whatever million people at the time. They were like the size of America at the time. Now they got to have like 1 billion people. But they were a huge country. They weren't scared. And honestly, they probably should have took some of that silver and invested in building up their navy and their army, because when Great Britain rolled in with their naval ships, they just started launching cannonballs, man, and not the opium kind, the kind that blow up and kill people. They were so far out at sea launching them because of their technology. Chinese people couldn't they couldn't do anything. They couldn't sink the ships. They couldn't get their own navy out. They would just get blown up. And Great Britain just started destroying cities, and lots of Chinese people were getting killed. And it became a huge disaster for the Chinese. And because the military leaders of these little regions in China feared the emperor so much, they were lying to him. They're like, oh, no, we got this. Don't worry. No, yeah, there's a war going on, a battle down here in Canton and other port cities, but we're doing okay. And they would basically lie. And while they were lying, the British just kept coming. Then a land battle ensued, and boom. You can't mess with Great Britain at the time. They were just too powerful of an army and navy, and they just started killing tons of Chinese people. And finally, the emperor had to surrender. And this is a disaster. This is just a disaster when you look back in history on this. So when they surrender, Great Britain was like, hey, man, these are the terms of the surrender. Oh, that island off China, you're going to give it to us. That's Hong Kong. So they took a piece of the country and they colonized it. And they did it because it would become one of the biggest port cities in the Far East. It had deep water. It was great for big ships. It was an awesome jump-off point. They can compete with the Spanish who were in Manila. So China had to give up Hong Kong. In fact, they didn't get Hong Kong back until like 1997. It's crazy. The British just took it. Also, you're going to open up more ports, not just Canton. We want like 5 more ports that we can come in and trade. And this was called the Treaty of Nanjing. And you're also going to pay us like 20 million bucks at the time in reparations. There goes all the Chinese silver. So now all of a sudden, China went from this huge, big superpower and got bullied into this war because Great Britain, and there was merchants from America, France, Japan. They were also getting a little piece of it, but it wasn't as significant as Great Britain. They were the drivers of the Opium War. Now China had to give up all its money, opened up all its ports, and they were fucked, right? So they went from this big superpower to being weak, even though they were so big. But one thing that was not mentioned in the Treaty of Nanjing is opium. It just went on business as usual. So China had to give up all this money. They had to open up more ports so more merchants and ships could come in with more opium to sell to the people, and nobody made it legal or illegal. They just kept it the same gray area and just kept selling it and selling it and selling it. It was so bad. So you got to look at different documentation. I've seen anywhere from 12% to 30% of the Chinese population got addicted to opium, right? And if you haven't watched our episode on the history of opium, opium is an opiate. That's like they were all addicted to Oxycontin, essentially, or heroin or fentanyl. Not as severe because those are opioids. Those are more synthetic, but it's still the same foundation of one of the most brain-changing, addicting drugs, where the farmers and the people, even in the military, and people that live in the cities and communities and families, they were spending all of their money on opium because they were addicted to it. And it just became ingrained in the fabric of the Chinese society. And they really got bullied into it. It's just a messed up story that the bully comes in, says, yo, you're going to buy drugs from us. So this is how the first Opium War started and ended. It lasted 4 years. It could have probably only lasted a day, except for the military leaders in the Chinese port cities were lying to the emperor trying to buy time. But tons of Chinese people got killed. And now the British built on Hong Kong, right? At first, they're like, oh, it's just a rocky island, but they built one of the biggest ports in the world. So now they could compete with Spain and Portugal, and they can work their way up as becoming the superpower in the world. So what started as a bunch of enslaved South Americans climbing through holes in the mountain to pull out silver while they were high on coca plant, that silver went to China so it could go out and illegally buy opium. And this was driven by dark capitalism. And we're going to talk more in the second episode, but China, when you think about China today and their posture in the world and the way we look at China or the way we're fed news about China, there is a reason that China doesn't trust anybody, and they're cut off, and they still make cheap products, right, to compete with the world. But they were humiliated. In fact, they call it the period of humiliation. They don't call it the Opium Wars. And the world essentially just bullied them, took all their money, forced them to do drugs, lied to them, killed them, cut them off, right? So while the Opium Wars are going on, China couldn't sell their porcelain or silk because the British Navy did their own blockade. So there was no products coming out. They choked them and squeezed them. And it was a disaster. When we go into the next section, or part 2 of our Opium Wars, there will be another battle. But a Scottish guy, or an Irish guy will come in that actually feels bad for China and what the world is doing to them. So he will essentially help them create a situation that will get them out of this. But not before millions and millions of lives are ruined. The world is now different because the boats are bigger, they're faster. Silver is now the master currency. We didn't get into the gold rush yet. Remember, we're in the 1600s right now, and then we get into the 1800s when the Opium War start, right? 1839. But it'll be after this where the gold rush starts and gold becomes king. But at this point, silver was king. Gold was still a currency. And the world is changing forever. And that's why so many things happen in the 1800s. So many wars, so many refigurations of maps and territories and technologies and substances are created. The 1800s bring us I can't say the word. They synthesize the alkaloids of cocaine in the 1800s. They synthesize heroin alkaloid in the 1800s, right? So drugs really get meshed into society during this time period. Wars are fought over them. Wars are fought on and with them. And then, of course, in some of our episodes you watch, after the war, the soldiers would be addicted to them, like the Civil War in America, the Crimea War, in the Eastern Bloc of Europe, because opium was everywhere. And the Chinese people, well, they got addicted to it just like everybody else who tries an opiate. It's super addicting. So the fact that the British Crown and the merchants and France and America and Japan and the Spanish and all, like, would just kind of push it on and make money and capitalize on it, it's fucking sick. But it happened. All right, stick around for part 2 of the Opium Wars.